After that, you went to law school, is that correct?
Yep.
So you are a lawyer.
My father wanted me to go to law school.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I knew what I learned from law school is what I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And after graduation, 2 weeks after graduation, my wife and I moved up to Woodstock. It was a magical thing that we found Woodstock. And this was after the festival.
This was when, about?
We bought the land in 1970, and we
So
started building it in the summer of '71.
And you knew nothing about, from what you told me, you
knew nothing about building. One of my friends who had had 6 credits of architecture decided he was going to help us build this house. He knew the rudimentary stuff he had to know, but there was a lot he didn't know, which caused great temporary grief as we tried to build this house. We spent far more over the course of the next 5 years than we were supposed to spend. I've never felt poor in my life before, but at this point we were feeling poor. My wife and I were going through something neither one of us had ever done before. And what happened with the house, it didn't take one summer to build. It took 5 years of continually getting money to build a new part, and money to build the next part. And
it truly is an amazing house now. You've really...
Thanks. Thank you.
It's really a wonder.
It's a different kind of house.
Tell me about the beams. You said you...
Well, can they see the beams?
Yeah, I'll take a picture of the beams.
The beams...
I'll do it right on.
We wanted to overbuild the house so everything was strong.
Right.
So in order to build these beams, I had to use, I think they're 2 by 10s or 12s.
Right.
And they're very, very long.
Yeah, they are.
And I had to walk each beam up a ladder, each end.
Right.
First I'd walk one end up, and then I'd go to and rest it on the sill.
It's amazing.
And then I'd walk the other one up and bang a nail into it so it stayed up there.
Right.
Went back to the other side, bang nails into, and then I added another beam right beside it so it stayed strong.
Right.
And we just built this whole thing. All the angles of the house are different, so we really gave ourselves something to do.
Yeah.
That was almost impossible.
Yeah. It is impossible.
So it drove us a little batty over the years.
Right. Yes, and these are the beams that, as you say, they're long beams, and you figured out a way to put them up there.
Walk a beam up on one side, then go to the other side and walk the other end up and attach there, and then come back and attach there.
And this, actually I'm just going to walk around. Sorry if it's a little bit shaky here, but it is what it is. Now, and there's the equipment and stuff, but, so this is a sunken, kind of a sunken room.
Yeah.
Could you just tell us about that a little bit? How you...
It was another dimension. I mean, if you look at this house, the dimensions are unlike most houses. The walls are not the same height as you go along the wall. We have sides to this place that are all crazy all around it, and it made it that much harder to build. And what else did you want to know?
Well, just, I guess just about the concept of the house, and it's just...
My friend designed the crux of the main part of the design. Nancy designed the roof. Which is slanted. You can see it. It comes down, so it takes off the right amount of moisture, and whether it's raining or snowing, it kind of drains off the roof the correct way.
Okay. Now,
it's basically a one-story flat house, but it's not flat. But along the course of that time, I found a way to make money.
Okay, and that was?
which was kind of miraculous. A friend of mine was going to be opening a pet shop, an antique store in Catskill, and he saw me over the course of the winter of 70. The winter of 71 into 72, and I was miserable. I was saying, what the heck am I going to do? 72, 73. Because in the summer of 72, what we did was sell all the engagement gifts we got while we lived in New York, because we needed to make some money. We ran out of those, and we said, what the hell are we going to do now? So on this trip with this guy, we went up to Albany to find stuff for him to buy to feed the shop, to give some stock to the his stock, his shop. So I'm feeling like I was his guest. Oh, let me preface. Before I left, my wife gave me $10 and said, please don't spend this. That's how poor we were. And I went up with him, took the $10, and we hit a shop somehow. Fate, you talk about fate, this was fate. The guy who was running the shop weighed items in his hand, and if an item was heavy, it was 50 cents, and if it was light, it was 25 cents.
Nice.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
So
Great.
I
People
found
love
all
Woodstock,
kinds of stuff for my friend to buy,
Right,
and whatever he didn't want that I liked, I bought.
right.
And I spent the whole $10.
Your forbidden $10.
I spent the whole $10, and the idea occurred to me, like, we sold things at the flea market in Woodstock when it was at the Playhouse, and it was very successful.
Same flea market.
Same flea market. So this
more.
time we were going to go back to the flea market after having spent the winter going to different auctions in Kingston and buying whatever we could because we didn't have a lot to spend. And at that time, American folk art was not really sought after. Most of the people up here were trying to buy oak furniture and porcelain and glass and jewelry and all kinds of things that probably rich people had in the day, way back. So we didn't have the money to compete with these people and didn't know anything about what they were doing, but we bought what our eye led us to. What we felt that, oh, that's cool, and that's cool. And this is at that time before what we liked was very popular.
Right.
So when it came time for the first day of this year's flea market, we went there, we set up these things that we had bought. In the first 5 minutes, some woman came over to me. We had bought this beautiful little...
Oh, was your wife upset with you that you spent the $10?
She cried.
She cried.
She cried.
Really?
Yeah. It was a...
Wow.
But I said, Nance, I think I found a way to make money for us. We're going to buy stuff to sell at the flea market.
Amazing, right?
So
did that make her feel better or no?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
It took this first moment
Right.
where this woman comes over to me and says, how much is that quilt? This log cabin quilt that we bought for $20.
Right.
And I looked at her, I looked at Nancy, I looked back at the woman, and I said, $75. And she said, well, I think I'll take that.
That was it.
And there was this silent thunderclap.
Right.
And I looked at Nancy, and when the woman walked away, I said, did you see what just happened?
You made $1.
On one object, I made $55.
Right, right.
So, to cut to the chase here, we sold continually objects that we were finding. We were able to buy up here. Once the flea market was kind of over, we'd still buy up here and take it down to New York, to other flea markets in New York. Now down there, they didn't get the stuff we got up here. This was the country. There was all kinds of primitive material everywhere.
West. Right.
So we would buy up here, live up here, and go down there to sell on weekends.
I see.
It just went up and up and up. We started making really good money. I was finding great stuff. I found that I had a good eye, and
And the original $10 items, they sold well.
oh, they sold quickly. They were gone quickly.
So you made
So
some money.
as we got to do better and better shows, I started to realize in my hunting that I was finding things that I knew weren't that readily saleable, but still had something about them that made me want to keep them. And in my head, I was kind of preparing for a future in art, which became...
Did you know that at the time?
I felt I wanted to do art with these pieces.
Oh,
I
that's
didn't want to
interesting.
get rid
So,
of them
yeah,
for
right,
nothing,
Right.
and they were too good to get
Right,
rid of.
right.
And I just kept storing up pieces for the future that I was going to do art.
Right.
Well, eventually this house was covered. The floors, you had to step over things to
Right.
get through the house.
Right.
My wife was going crazy.
Right.
So she was going to be going to down to Florida to visit her parents.
Right.
So she said to me, Len, if you don't make one piece of sculpture, I was hesitating all the time. I didn't want to put holes in things.
Right.
And each piece to me was kind of something that should be revered.
Right.
And here I was thinking of putting holes
Revered
in them to
because
join
it's
them up.
past and it's,
Oh, it comes at a time to
Right,
me, you know.
right,
and
right.
I hunted and worked to find it, but still, it came down through time to me.
Right.
And I felt some real responsibility towards these pieces.
Right.
At first, I didn't want to hurt them, but then it got to the point. She said, if you don't make a sculpture, I'm throwing all this out. I'm bringing it to the dump, and that's it. Now, that was a lot of money. I spent a lot of money on that stuff.
Buying junk, right?
So
Pressers.
I actually wound up making my first piece. And there was a show on Madison Avenue the week after my father died. This was 1991, he died in December. And a week after he died, there was an article in my weekly newspaper that was for the business, and it said a big ad wanted the art of the dealer. This was one of the famous American art dealers, antique American art and folk art. And he said, if you're a dealer in antiques or art and you make your own art, come down to, it was on Madison Avenue, this gallery,
Right.
right above Park Bennett, which at that time didn't exist anymore. And we set up a show at the Coliseum in New York
Right.
with antiques that we had for sale. And I had made an appointment to go visit this guy to see whether he would jury me into his show or not. So I brought this first piece down to him, and he laughed and said, "You're in." So what this piece was a 19th century heavy wooden bowling ball,
Right.
probably lignum vitae, which was a very hard, unusual, difficult to find wood. And I mounted this on a small plinth, a little base. There was a crack right through the ball that made it cheap for me to buy and unsaleable in the antiques
That's an
market.
antique.
So in this crack, I inserted what they call a carpenter's traveler, and it was a round, almost like a blade. This piece was 200 years old, and it started about that thick in the middle and went out and tapered to a kind of sharp edge. There was a little notch on the edge, and what the carpenters did, they didn't have long Lufkin rulers that you could roll out a tape and
Right.
measure a distance on a board. So they counted the number of rotations that they had to go down the board, that the size of the board they were going to use, and they were able to keep repeating that exact size
Right.
with this roller.
Right.
It rolled down the board. So I stuck this blade that had a nice iron handle on it
Right.
into the crack. Perfect fit.
Right.
The handle, I put a mannequin, an old mannequin hand
Right.
onto the ball itself,
Right.
attached at the wrist,
Right.
holding this handle
Right.
and pulling the blade through the
Through.
ball, which was a
Wonderful.
whole entity.
Right.
And I called it I called it Suicide, which was a tough title, but it seemed to refer to the piece perfectly.
Right.
So that's the piece I brought down to this guy, and opening night, I was on my way to my first show, and it was on Madison Avenue.
Now, he had other things for you, from your...
Not for me, but he had other people's,
pieces, right.
other artists, you know,
Right.
dealers that I knew.
Mhm.
And I got down there an hour and a half late because there was a dragnet on the New York Thruway. They were looking for the transvestite murderer who had just escaped from prison.
Oh,
And it took me an hour and a half to get through this 1 mile
all right, stretch.
roadblock. We eventually got there. I see a group of tuxedoed men coming out into the long black limousine, and I went into the building and went upstairs, and there was a red circle on my piece, you know, on the
Right.
label, covering the price. So the guy who owned this gallery, his name was Alexander Acevedo. If you looked him up, you'd see what he was. And he said, "You sold your piece for $2,500. Now I had spent $37 in materials
Wow, right,
to make this piece.
right, wow.
And there, $2,500, I got into all the antique weekly magazines and newspapers. And
Because it was your first sale? Or
well,
it
because
was-
I was one of the ones who actually
Oh, I
sold
see.
there.
Right, right, right,
And from then on, I felt I have to continue this.
right.
And for me to be able to get a solo show where it was all my work, I knew I had to keep making art to get a supply together, to have enough. So I joined the Woodstock Artists Association because there you can submit a piece a month, and if it gets accepted, you can't put it in again. So you'd have to keep making pieces to
You have
get
to be
into all the
productive,
shows.
right.
And I knew I'm probably the hardest working, lazy man on earth. But when I have to do something, I push myself.
Right,
And I did that, and I got a lot of good work done. Over the course of the time, I was winning a lot of awards in the Artists Association.
right,
And finally, after a year of pressing this promoter in New York, who was at that time doing the Triple Pier show on the Hudson River,
right.
where there were 600 dealers, finally she gave me a show where I could see these were antique shows.
Right.
So they didn't want to sell new stuff,
Mm-hmm.
even though it was made totally of old stuff.
Right.
But I went to her, they were selling tables made out of old iron gating, they were selling pillows made out of cut up Persian rugs, lamps made out of iron that was for something else. And I said, look, you let all these people sell these things that are new, made from old stuff, they're utilitarian, yes, but why can't you show my art in this show, which is not utilitarian, but it's still totally made up of old things.
Right.
So she thought about it for a year, and finally she
Really?
said,
Took
we're
a
going
year to
to
do
give
it.
you a
Wow.
show, we're going to
Nice.
make you the star of the show, and write up what you do. And the theme was things you can make with old stuff.
Right.
And they gave me a booth right in the front of the pier, the
Right.
middle pier.
This is your own booth now.
My own booth. Nobody could get through the show without passing my art.
Nice.
And she didn't charge me anything for it.
Nice.
And I was there for 2 weekends setting up 2 different shows with the 27 pieces that I brought down to do this show. I'm going to not talk about what it felt like each time a piece sold.
Oh, you got to tell me. Just tell me
Oh
about
man,
it.
the first time a piece sold, I was disbelieving. Because we had to price this stuff. In New York, you have to price
Right.
everything you put out.
Right.
And someone came along and went crazy over one of the pieces
Right.
and actually bought it.
Right.
Then another person came along and bought another piece. Then another person came along and
Just
bought
bought
2
it,
pieces.
Wow.
And my heart is flipping inside.
Right. What an achievement.
Over the course, well, one guy who came through said, I'm a real buyer. how much for that, and that?
Wow. Oh, God.
I couldn't believe it.
Right.
So I gave him a decent price, and he bought them all. He bought them all. And then he said to me, but you'll have to bring them to my office on, I think it was First Avenue, that's in, at 53rd Street or 49th Street, I'm not sure which one it was. But he had a building, and his office was on the 5th floor. They had an elevator that could take up my van
Right.
to the top. He said, you have to deliver it to my office. And I went, and I brought the pieces to his office. And then he said, you can show me whatever you do, and I'm interested in buying. This was the president of Smith and Walensky Steakhouse in New York.
Right.
And at that time, they were involved in building all over the country new restaurants. Mm-hmm. And this guy used old Americana to decorate. And my stuff was made up of old Americana. Mm-hmm. So over the course of time, he bought over 100 of my pieces.
Wow.
And with that occurrence, people started looking at me in a different way in Woodstock, because every artist dreams about selling.
Yeah.
And here I actually was lucky enough to find a way to sell my art.
Yeah.
I had been doing antique shows for years and years, and I was able to translate that into another show of selling my artwork.
Right.
And it was the most amazing thing that happened to me.
Right.
It was great. It was like hitting a home run. I've hit a home run in my life. I got my wife, I got my kids. It was just one of those occurrences that takes you and makes a new person. It makes a new person.
Tell me about this new person. Tell me about this transition.
Well, it opened up another side of the world to me. And after that, I became the chairman at the Woodstock Artists Association for 6 years. I made lots of friends in art. When I finally retired from the chairmanship, there was this restaurant across the street called Oriole 9. Most of you know about it.
When is this? Because
This
is actually how I first heard about you, through the Oriole 9.
Well, I've been doing it for probably over 10 years now. We're right now, at this moment, in the 98th show that I've curated there. And when I say curate, I not only went around to the artists, but also made the shows. I put them up. This is when I was physically able to do that. And it caught on, and it's still there. And
the shows are how often?
Every month.
Every month.
Every month I put up a different show. And I went to the owners when I first came up with this concept, because I knew that most of the artists in Woodstock did not have a great place to show. They could show at the WAAM, get one piece in at a time, or if they're really lucky, get a solo show at the WAAM for 1 month out of the year, and that's hard to do now. So I went to the owners, Luke and Nina, and I said, look, these walls are getting boring. I had been eating there for a year and a quarter, or close to a year and a half. And I said, I can change the art and put up really good art every month.
Every month.
And I won't charge you anything to do it.
Right.
Because that's how strongly I felt about getting a place for the artists.
Right.
And they agreed. They put up a whole hanging system, and it started. And it's turned into a really great venue.
And they love it there now.
Everyone loves it. It's something that distinguishes a restaurant in the town in a different way than restaurants usually get acknowledged.
Yeah.
And,
it's an exceptional thing to do, and that's how I first heard about you, through your.
This is one of the things that I've accomplished.
Yeah.
Besides making and selling art all over the place.
And then you moved to New World Cooking.
And they came and asked for me to do that too, because they really liked what I did at Oriole 9, and I got involved in there. But at that point, I made a different agreement, because I had been doing it for so many years and I was getting tired. I felt myself getting weaker, and I knew the work is very hard, very difficult. And I said, what would you like your commission to be? And they said, we don't need a commission. So at that point I said, do you mind if I take a commission? And they said, not at all. So I decided to take a 20% commission. And that was the beginning of that. Right now, they've decided that they just wanted my art on the walls, because they said that's what makes the restaurant look the way they want it to look.
Right.
So that kind of brought the curating there to a halt, except I curate myself.
Your own stuff.
And it's, I've had to call people recently and tell them, look, you're gonna have to wait till next year for Oriole 9, because
There's so many.
I can't, Oriole 9 is filled for the year,
Yeah.
and they're not gonna want other art in
Okay.
New World.